hypertrophy rep range. This is the this is when you're hitting about 8 to 12 repetitions for every workout. Sometimes you may be doing supersets or trisets, where you're doing kind of one muscle and then you hit another muscle group. So although the rest typically is about 60 seconds when you're in a hypertrophy phase, 8 to 12 reps, 60 seconds. Sometimes it can be as short as 30 if you're supersetting it with another muscle group. So say you're doing chest and then you do a back workout right after, a back exercise right after, you may only have 30 seconds because technically you were resting chest while you were working back. So that's why sometimes you'll see workouts that are like that are in the 8 to 12 rep range. Now, one caveat to that would be if you're just working the same muscle nonstop, even if it's in the 8 to 12 rep range, it can get kind of tricky because you'll kind of move into the endurance phase. Because even though you're changing exercises, you're still hitting that muscle over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, which leads to endurance. Hypertrophy rep range is when you're adding size to the muscle. This is when you're a lot of times bringing water into the muscle. This is when you the muscle is actually more visible because you're adding that size to it. You're bringing the water into the muscle. This is where a lot of times the muscle definition comes into play. But again, a lot of times people will hear this and they will say, well, so I should only do, like 10 reps or 12 reps or whatever, only stick to hypertrophy because I just want muscle definition. The caveat to muscle definition, as I've mentioned previously in the toning video and probably in the bulking series, which obviously if you're not into bulking, you probably never watched those, but the caveat to being in a muscle defining stage is that you have to have a muscle building stage at some point. You can't define if it's not there. So often you'll have people that only want to stick to, if they hear, oh, this is the muscle defining stage, that they want to stay there. So if you don't have muscle, then the muscle defining stage isn't going to magically define your muscle. And that's not to be mean, it's to be honest, because it's a common misconception, just the same way a lot of people think that super high reps will get them ripped, but you cannot rip what isn't there. So with your muscle defining stage, or with your muscle size stage, which is what the hypertrophy rep range is, it really helps if you have that muscle density, like we talked about with the strength rep range, and because you'll see the muscle, but this is often when you'll have that kind of the deflated muscle where, yeah, you'll see it, but it's like you squeeze it and it's gone, or you stop working the hypertrophy range and it's gone. So it's almost like a figment of your imagination because you have to keep in that range in order to see it, or you have to keep working out. And when you stop working out, you don't see it that much anymore. This is why a lot of times, people will experience what we call the whoosh, on their rest weeks, where maybe their scale weight was extremely high while they're working the hypertrophy range, but then when they stop, they start to lose a little bit of that water, which makes them really happy when they step on the scale. But at the same time, your muscles start to deflate a bit because it was kind of, a figment of your imagination, because you still need some muscle density there. So they work hand in hand. You can inflate the muscle a little bit more when you have this nice dense muscle there, but even when you start to lose water, you still have a muscle there. So you want to be able to work both rep ranges. The endurance rep range is pretty much anything above 12 reps. Once you start hitting the 12, 15, 20, 25, whatever amount of reps you're doing, once it's above and beyond 12, you've pretty much run into an endurance phase. an endurance phase is exactly what it sounds like. It builds actual endurance in the muscles. So if you need greater endurance, then that's the phase that you're going to stick to the majority of the time. But as I said before, you still need the strength training phase because you still need strength. Now, even though these two seem like they're opposite ends of the spectrum, because technically they do kind of fight each other, you know, if you're sticking to endurance and you're wondering why you can't increase or why you can't, you know, hit these big numbers that you sometimes see other people post, or, you know, you like really want to beast at the gym, but you're doing 12 to 15 reps, well, you're not going to be able to lift that much. Technically the way that it is the higher the amount of reps that you're doing, the lower amount of weight that you're doing. So you can't get crazy and lift what a person that's only doing 5 reps is doing if you're doing 15. It's just not going to work. But even though they're opposite ends of the spectrum, you need both, because the endurance phases is what allows your smaller muscles to adapt so that you can be able to lift the heavier weights in your strength phases. So a person that loves the strength rep range may notice that, you know, if they do this rep range for ever, months and months and months, that they begin to hit a plateau. They can't increase their numbers anymore on their bench or their row, or, you know, for some reason they're just like, you know, you get that where maybe you're trying to row or you're trying to bench and your smaller muscles are failing. Your triceps or your shoulders can't take it on the bench. Your forearms and biceps can't take the load on the back. So even though you're dealing with the bigger muscles like the back or the chest, the smaller muscles are failing first. So you know you can lift heavier, but you can't. This is often when a person will, you know, they'll resort to using maybe the bands or the hooks to help you lift a little bit more, which obviously there's nothing wrong with that if, you know, if you're really trying to get a PR and you're failing, your arms are failing too early, but you know that your back can take it, you'll use some lifting straps or some hooks and you'll kill it. But dipping down into that endurance range once in a while will naturally help that, because your endurance is what allows you to hold on to that heavy weight when everything else is failing. So a lot of times where you have that when you're trying to row or deadlift and that bar is slipping out of your arms, that's why. It's because of the lack of endurance in your forearms and your biceps. Your grip strength is weak. The way to fix that is by, you know, deloading for a little while, maybe dipping into the endurance range, doing maybe a mini, you know, 3-week or so phase of endurance, and then heading back into the other rep ranges again. And oftentimes you'll find that you'll break your plateau because you've increased that endurance in the muscles, so it can actually pull the weight. It can literally hold on to the weight for longer than it could before. Another way that you can incorporate that is, you know, sometimes a person will just do an endurance day once in a while, or 1 week. You know, the phases can be anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I tend to do my endurance phases in maybe 3 to 4 week increments, only because I despise endurance. But I like lifting heavy, and having greater endurance allows me to lift heavier. And whenever I skip my endurance phases for long periods of time, I notice it, because I'll start hitting a brick wall in training, and I'll start, you know, I'm trying to do a certain amount of pull-ups and I can't, or I'm trying to, you know, hit new numbers in my row and it's just not happening. I know to stop, take a break, go to endurance for anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. 3 typically as long as I can stand. Sometimes I'll do 4 if I'm doing like the STS program, just because it's a 4-week plan and I'm a stick to the plan type person. But for myself, for clients, I'll typically put them on a 3 to 6 week endurance plan right off the bat, especially if it's someone that's working with me for the first time, because I want to know that they can handle it. So even if they tell me that they've been doing it, I want to know, I want to see, I want to track their numbers, see the endurance numbers increase, because then I'll know that their strength numbers will increase as well.